Stephanie slammed the HOA violation notice onto the kitchen counter, her hands trembling with rage. "This is unbelievable," she shouted, whirling to face her husband, Mark. Mark rushed over, scanning the document. "They're fining us for the roof repairs, but we had approval." "Apparently not." Stephanie's voice dripped with bitterness. "They're claiming the repairs didn't match their aesthetic guidelines, as if they have the right to dictate how our own home looks." Mark ran a hand through his hair, his brow furrowed with worry. "We can't afford these fines. What are we supposed to do?" Stephanie's eyes narrowed. "We fight back. This is our home, Mark. We're not going to let them bully us." Without another word, she stormed out of the kitchen, determination etched on her face. Mark hurried after her, struggling to keep up. In the home office, Stephanie furiously typed away on her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. Mark hovered nearby, unsure of how to help. "There," Stephanie said finally, leaning back in her chair. "I filed an official complaint with the State Housing Board. Now we wait for their response." Mark's eyes widened. "You think that'll work?" Stephanie's gaze was unwavering. "It has to. We can't back down, Mark. Not this time." Days passed in tense silence. Stephanie and Mark went about their daily routines, but the shadow of the looming HOA battle hung over them like a dark cloud. Then, one afternoon, the phone rang. Stephanie snatched it up, her heart pounding. "This is the State Housing Board," a crisp voice announced. "We've reviewed your complaint, and we'd like to schedule a hearing." Stephanie's grip tightened on the receiver. "When?" "Next week," the official replied. "Be prepared to present your case." As Stephanie hung up the phone, Mark approached, his expression a mix of hope and apprehension. "Well, they're going to hear us out," Stephanie said, her voice steady. "Next week." Mark nodded slowly. "Okay, then we'd better get ready." The day of the hearing arrived, and Stephanie and Mark found themselves sitting across the table from the HOA board members, their faces impassive. Stephanie took a deep breath and began laying out their case, her words measured and determined. She detailed the approved roof repairs, the HOA's sudden rejection, and the crippling fines they now faced. The HOA board members listened in silence, their expressions betraying nothing. When Stephanie finished, the board president cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the documentation you provided," he said, his tone neutral. "And we stand by our decision. The repairs did not meet our aesthetic guidelines, and the fines will stand." Stephanie felt the blood drain from her face. "But that's not fair," she protested. "We followed all the rules." The board president raised a hand. "Our decision is final. You have the option to appeal, but I can assure you it will be a waste of your time." Mark placed a hand on Stephanie's arm, his eyes pleading. "Please, there has to be something we can do." The board president's gaze hardened. "There's nothing more to discuss. This meeting is adjourned." As Stephanie and Mark walked dejectedly back to their car, the weight of defeat hung heavy on their shoulders. They had fought the system, and they had lost. Or had they? Stephanie stared out the car window, her mind racing. The HOA board's dismissive attitude had only fueled her determination. There had to be a way to make them listen, to make them see the injustice of their decision. As they pulled into the driveway, a spark of inspiration flickered in Stephanie's mind. "Mark, I have an idea," she said, turning to her husband. Mark looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "What is it?" "We're not going to let them get away with this," Stephanie declared, her voice resolute. "We're going to take them to court." Mark's eyes widened. "Court. But they said the decision was final. Won't that be a waste of time and money?" Stephanie shook her head. "Not if we do it right. We'll need to gather all the evidence, hire a good lawyer, and show them that we're serious about this." Mark hesitated, his brow furrowed with worry. "I don't know, Steph. It sounds risky. What if we lose?" "We have to try, Mark," Stephanie said, her gaze unwavering. This isn't just about the roof repairs anymore. It's about standing up for our rights as homeowners. We can't let them bully us like this. Mark sighed, knowing better than to argue with his determined wife. Okay, let's do it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Stephanie and Mark meticulously compiled documentation, gathered witness statements, and searched for a reputable lawyer who could take on their case. Finally, they found their match in Jessica, a fiery young attorney with a reputation for taking on HOA battles. She listened intently as Stephanie and Mark laid out their story, her eyes narrowing with each detail. "This is a clear-cut case of HOA overreach," Jessica declared, her voice brimming with confidence. "We've got a strong argument, and I'm confident we can win." Stephanie felt a surge of hope, while Mark still looked apprehensive. "What are our chances?" he asked. Jessica leaned back in her chair, a wry smile on her lips. "HOAs don't like to lose in court. They're usually able to bully homeowners into submission. But with the evidence we have, I'd say our chances are pretty good." With that, the legal battle began. Stephanie and Mark poured their life savings into the fight, determined to see it through no matter the cost. The court date arrived, and Stephanie and Mark sat anxiously in the gallery, their palms sweating. Jessica stood before the judge, her voice strong and unwavering as she laid out their case. The HOA's lawyers, on the other hand, seemed unruffled, their arguments smooth and polished. They insisted that the board had followed proper procedures and that the repairs were indeed a violation of their guidelines. As the hearing dragged on, Stephanie felt her heart sinking. Maybe they had been too optimistic, she thought. Maybe the HOA was just too powerful to take down. But then, just as the judge was about to deliver his verdict, Jessica stood up, a triumphant gleam in her eye. "Your Honor," she said, "I have one more piece of evidence to present." Stephanie and Mark exchanged a puzzled glance, their breath caught in their throats. What could Jessica possibly have up her sleeve? Jessica strode to the front of the courtroom, a folder clutched in her hand. "Your Honor, I apologize for the late addition, but I've uncovered some crucial information that I believe will change the course of this case." The judge raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Very well, Ms. Wilkins, proceed." Stephanie and Mark watched with bated breath as Jessica opened the folder and began laying out a series of photographs and documents. "As you can see, Your Honor," Jessica said, her voice clear and confident, "the HOA's own guidelines clearly state that homeowners have the right to make reasonable repairs to their property without prior approval, as long as the repairs meet certain aesthetic standards." The judge leaned forward, studying the evidence closely. "I see. And how does this pertain to the case at hand?" Jessica's gaze hardened. The repairs made by my clients, Stephanie and Mark, were well within the HOA's own guidelines. Yet, the board rejected their request and issued crippling fines, citing aesthetic issues that are not even mentioned in their own rules. The HOA's lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces unreadable. Jessica continued, her tone unwavering. "This is a clear-cut case of abuse of power, Your Honor. The HOA board has overstepped its authority and violated the rights of my clients. We're asking that the fines be immediately rescinded and that the board be held accountable for their actions." The judge listened intently, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he turned to the HOA's lawyers. "Well, gentlemen, do you have a response to these allegations?" The lead lawyer stood, his face tense. "Your Honor, we maintained that the board acted within its authority and that the repairs did not meet our aesthetic guidelines, even if they are not explicitly stated in our bylaws." Jessica cut him off, her voice sharp. "That's precisely the problem, Your Honor. The HOA is attempting to enforce rules that are not clearly defined, leaving homeowners at the mercy of the board's subjective interpretations." The judge nodded slowly, his gaze shifting between the two legal teams. "I see. This is a complex matter, and I will need some time to review the evidence and precedents before rendering a decision." He paused, his eyes settling on Stephanie and Mark. In the meantime, I am issuing a temporary stay on the fines until this case is resolved. You may continue with your roof repairs as planned. Stephanie felt a surge of relief, while Mark's face broke into a wide grin. They had won a small victory, but the larger battle was still to be fought. As they left the courthouse, Jessica placed a reassuring hand on Stephanie's arm. Don't worry, we're just getting started. This is going to be a fight, but I'm confident we can win. Stephanie nodded, her determination renewed. They had come too far to back down now. The war with the HOA was far from over. In the weeks that followed, the legal battle intensified. Stephanie and Mark spent countless hours poring over documents, meeting with Jessica, and preparing for the next court appearance. The HOA, meanwhile, was not willing to back down without a fight. They'd hired a team of experienced lawyers and launched a relentless campaign to discredit Stephanie and Mark's case. During the second hearing, the HOA's lawyers grilled Stephanie and Mark, questioning the legitimacy of their repair work and the reliability of their evidence. Stephanie felt her nerves fraying as the cross-examination dragged on. She could see the doubt creeping into the judge's expression, and she knew they were on the verge of losing everything. But then, just as the HOA's lawyers were wrapping up their questioning, Jessica stood up, a triumphant smile on her face. "Your Honor, I have one more witness I'd like to call to the stand," she announced. The HOA's lawyers exchanged puzzled glances, and the judge nodded, his curiosity piqued. Jessica gestured to the door, and a middle-aged man in a crisp suit strode into the courtroom. Stephanie recognized him as the head of the local building inspection department. "Mr. Daniels," Jessica began, "can you please describe the findings of your department's inspection of the roof repairs performed by my clients?" The inspector cleared his throat and launched into a detailed account of the inspection process. He explained that the repairs had been conducted in full compliance with local building codes and that the work was of high quality. In fact, Mr. Daniels concluded the repairs exceeded the HOA's own aesthetic guidelines in terms of workmanship and materials used. Stephanie felt a surge of relief as she watched the HOA's lawyers scramble to mount a rebuttal. The judge, on the other hand, leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels," the judge said. "Your testimony has been most illuminating." He then turned to the HOA's legal team, his voice stern. "Gentlemen, it would appear that your board has been operating under a rather narrow interpretation of its own guidelines. I'm inclined to rule in favor of the plaintiffs, but I'd like to hear your final arguments before rendering my decision." The HOA's lawyers stood, their faces grim. They argued that the board's authority should not be undermined, that the guidelines were meant to maintain the community's aesthetic standards, and that Stephanie and Mark's repairs, while technically compliant, still fell short of the board's expectations. Jessica, however, was relentless in her rebuttal. She pointed out the glaring inconsistencies in the HOA's position and the clear abuse of power demonstrated by the board. Finally, the judge raised a hand, silencing the lawyers. "I've heard enough. It's clear to me that the HOA board has overstepped its bounds and violated the rights of the homeowners in this case." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiffs. The fines are hereby rescinded, and the HOA board will be required to reimburse Stephanie and Mark for all legal expenses incurred." Stephanie felt a wave of relief and elation wash over her. They had won. After months of struggle and uncertainty, justice had prevailed. As they left the courthouse, Mark wrapped his arms around his wife, a grin spreading across his face. "I can't believe it. We actually did it." Stephanie smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "I never doubted it for a second." Despite their victory in court, Stephanie and Mark knew that the battle with the HOA was far from over. The board members, stunned by their defeat, were not about to let the matter rest. In the weeks that followed, the harassment and intimidation tactics began. Stephanie and Mark found anonymous letters in their mailbox, warning them to keep their noses out of HOA business. Their neighbors, once friendly, now eyed them with suspicion and kept their distance. Stephanie couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. "They're not going to let this go, are they?" she said to Mark one evening, as they sat in their living room, the flickering light of the TV casting shadows across their faces. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was afraid of this. These HOA types, they don't like to lose. They're going to keep coming at us until they break us." Stephanie's jaw tightened with determination. "Well, they picked the wrong couple to mess with. We're not going to back down, not after everything we've been through." She reached across the couch and squeezed Mark's hand. "We're in this together, no matter what. And we've got Jessica on our side. We can handle whatever they throw at us." Mark nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "You're right. We've come too far to give up now." The next day, Stephanie and Mark met with Jessica, determined to plan their next move. The lawyer listened intently as they recounted the latest incidents of harassment, her brow furrowing with concern. "This is classic HOA retaliation," Jessica said, her voice grim. "They're trying to wear you down, make you regret ever challenging their authority." She paused, her gaze sharpening. "But we're not going to let them. We're going to hit them where it hurts the most, their pockets." Stephanie and Mark exchanged a puzzled glance. "What do you mean?" Jessica leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with determination. "We're going to sue the HOA for harassment and abuse of power. We'll seek damages, and we'll make them pay for every single act of intimidation and retaliation." Stephanie felt a surge of hope. "Do you think we can win?" Jessica's lips curled into a confident smile. "I'm sure of it. We have a strong case, and the courts don't take kindly to HOAs that abuse their authority. This time, we're going to make them regret ever crossing you." With renewed energy, the trio set to work, poring over evidence and building their case. Stephanie and Mark knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but they were more determined than ever to see this fight through to the end. As the weeks turned into months, the legal battle raged on. The HOA board, unwilling to admit defeat, threw everything they had at Stephanie and Mark, trying to bury them in a mountain of paperwork and legal fees. But Jessica proved to be a formidable opponent, her tenacity and sharp legal mind more than a match for the HOA's tactics. She relentlessly pursued every avenue of attack, leaving no stone unturned in her quest for justice. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, the verdict came in. The courtroom was hushed as the judge read the verdict aloud, his voice solemn. In the case of Stephanie and Mark Ryder versus the Willow Oaks Homeowners Association, the court finds in favor of the plaintiffs. Stephanie felt her heart pounding in her chest as the judge continued. "The defendant HOA is hereby ordered to pay the plaintiffs $250,000 in damages for harassment, abuse of power, and violation of their rights as homeowners." A gasp rippled through the audience, and Stephanie felt Mark's hand tighten around hers. They had won, a decisive and resounding victory over the HOA that had tormented them for so long. As the judge adjourned the court, Stephanie and Mark embraced, tears of joy streaming down their faces. Jessica stood nearby, a triumphant smile on her lips. "I told you we could do it," she said, placing a hand on Stephanie's shoulder. "No HOA is a match for my legal prowess." Stephanie laughed, the weight of the world lifted from her shoulders. "You were amazing, Jessica. We couldn't have done it without you." As they left the courthouse, Stephanie and Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. They had stood up to the HOA's bullying tactics and emerged victorious, a testament to the power of perseverance and the pursuit of justice. But their relief was short-lived. As they pulled into their driveway, they were greeted by an unsettling sight. Their home had been vandalized. The front door was covered in spray-painted obscenities, and their car had been keyed, the paint scratched beyond repair. Stephanie felt her stomach drop. "Oh my God. Mark, look at this." Mark's face darkened with anger as he surveyed the damage. "Those bastards. They're not going to get away with this." They rushed inside, their hearts racing. Stephanie immediately called the police, her voice trembling as she reported the incident. While they waited for the officers to arrive, Stephanie and Mark tried to piece together what had happened. They knew, deep down, that this was the HOA's retaliation for their courtroom victory. "This is only the beginning," Stephanie said, her eyes filled with determination. "They're not going to stop until they break us." Mark nodded, his jaw set in a grim line. "Then we'll just have to fight back harder. We're not going to let them win, not after everything we've been through." When the police arrived, they dutifully documented the vandalism and promised to investigate the incident. But Stephanie and Mark knew that the real battle was just beginning. As they surveyed the damage to their home, Stephanie couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The HOA had taken their fight to a new level, and she knew that they would have to be prepared for anything. But she also knew that they weren't alone. They had Jessica on their side, a formidable ally in their fight against the HOA's relentless campaign of intimidation and retaliation. With a steely resolve, Stephanie turned to Mark, her eyes shining with determination. "We're not going to back down, Mark. We're going to fight them every step of the way." Mark nodded, his expression mirroring her own. "Whatever it takes, Steph. We're in this together." In the days that followed the vandalism incident, Stephanie and Mark felt like they were living in a state of constant vigilance. They jumped at every unexpected noise, their nerves frayed with anxiety. Jessica, sensing their distress, arranged an emergency meeting to discuss their next steps. As they gathered in her office, the lawyer's expression was grim. "I won't lie to you," she said, her voice low. "This is a dangerous escalation by the HOA. They're clearly not willing to accept defeat, and they're willing to resort to criminal tactics to intimidate you." Stephanie felt a chill run down her spine. "What does that mean for us?" Jessica leaned forward, her eyes serious. "It means we need to take extra precautions. We need to document everything, report any further incidents to the police, and consider bolstering the security around your home." Mark nodded, his brow furrowed with worry. "We're already on edge, Jessica. How much more can we take?" The lawyer reached across the desk, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "I know this is tough, but we can't give up now. We've come too far to let them win." Stephanie took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "She's right, Mark. We have to keep fighting. For our home, for our rights, and for the principle of it all." Jessica smiled, a spark of admiration in her eyes. "That's the spirit. Now, let's talk strategy." Over the next few weeks, Stephanie and Mark implemented a series of security measures, from installing security cameras to upgrading their home's alarm system. They also maintained a meticulous record of every incident, no matter how small, and reported each one to the authorities. But the HOA's retaliation only seemed to escalate. Mysterious accidents began to plague their property: a broken window, a slashed tire, a malfunctioning sprinkler system that flooded their yard. Stephanie and Mark felt like they were living in a state of constant fear, always looking over their shoulder, wondering what the HOA would do next. And then, one night, the unthinkable happened. Stephanie was startled awake by the sound of glass shattering. She shook Mark, her heart pounding. "Someone's in the house." They froze, listening intently. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, drawing closer. Stephanie grabbed the baseball bat they kept by the bed, her knuckles turning white with the force of her grip. Mark reached for the phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed 911. "This is an emergency," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "We have an intruder in our home." Stephanie held her breath, every muscle in her body tensed for a confrontation. As the footsteps drew nearer, she steeled herself, ready to defend her home and her family at all costs. But just as the intruder came into view, a familiar voice rang out. "Stephanie? Mark? What's going on?" It was their neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, her face etched with confusion and concern. Stephanie felt a surge of relief and anger wash over her. Mrs. Henderson. What are you doing in our house? The older woman's eyes widened. I heard a noise and thought someone might be in trouble. I was just trying to help. Mark lowered the phone, his shoulders sagging. Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Henderson. But next time, please call the police. You could have been hurt. As the police arrived and the situation was resolved, Stephanie and Mark realized that the HOA's campaign of terror had reached a new level of desperation. They were willing to go to any lengths to break them, even if it meant putting innocent lives at risk. In the aftermath of the harrowing home invasion incident, Stephanie and Mark knew they had to take drastic action. The HOA's escalating campaign of retaliation had put their family's safety at risk, and they could no longer sit idly by. Gathering with Jessica in her office, they laid out their plan of attack. We need to go public with this, Stephanie said, her voice resolute. The HOA needs to be held accountable for their actions, and the only way to do that is to shine a light on their corruption. Jessica nodded, her expression grave. I'd agree. We've tried to handle this through the courts, but the HOA seems determined to stop at nothing to break you. Going public may be our best chance at finally putting an end to this. Mark spoke up, his brow furrowed with concern. But won't that just make them retaliate even harder? We're already dealing with vandalism and break-ins. What if they try to hurt us or our family? Stephanie reached across the table, squeezing his hand. I know it's risky, Mark, but we can't live in fear anymore. We have to fight back, and this is the only way to do it. Jessica leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. I'll make sure you're protected, Mark. We'll work with the police to ensure your safety, and we'll use the media exposure to our advantage. The HOA won't be able to touch you once the spotlight is on them. Nodding slowly, Mark seemed to accept the plan, his resolve hardening. Okay, let's do it. Over the next few days, Jessica orchestrated a masterful media campaign. She reached out to local news outlets, detailing the riders' harrowing ordeal and the HOA's abusive tactics. Reporters were soon clamoring for interviews, and the story quickly gained national attention. As the coverage began to air, the riders braced themselves for the HOA's inevitable retaliation. But to their surprise, the board members seemed to have gone into hiding, their usually vocal spokespeople conspicuously absent from the media frenzy. They're scrambling, Jessica said, a triumphant grin on her face. The public scrutiny is getting to them. They know they can't afford the PR nightmare of being exposed as corrupt bullies. Stephanie felt a surge of relief, but she couldn't shake the lingering sense of unease. Do you really think they're going to back down, Jessica? They've come this far, and they've shown they're willing to do anything to win. The lawyer's expression hardened. Then we'll be ready for them. We've got the police on high alert, and we've got the media on our side. The riders aren't going to be their victims anymore. True to Jessica's words, the HOA remained conspicuously silent in the face of the growing media storm. The public outcry over their abusive tactics quickly snowballed, with calls for state and federal investigations into the association's practices. Stephanie and Mark watched in awe as the tables turned, the HOA's once untouchable power crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny. And then, one day, the board president himself appeared on the riders' doorstep, his face etched with defeat. We're dropping the fines, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And we're resigning from the board, effective immediately. Stephanie felt a mixture of triumph and disbelief. You're really giving up? The board president nodded, his shoulders slumped. We have no choice. The damage to the HOA's reputation is too great. We can't fight this anymore. As the man turned and walked away, Stephanie felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They had won. After months of struggle and sacrifice, the riders had emerged victorious, their home and their rights finally secured. Mark pulled Stephanie into a tight embrace, tears of joy streaming down his face. It's over, Steph. We did it. Stephanie smiled, her own eyes glistening. Yes, we did, and we're never going to let them forget it.